1994,
I mean, I read all this shit last night.
to discuss how we're going to do these things.
That's right. That's right. So he's going to just walk away.
Yeah. You don't look around at it. I got on the elevator. I go like this.
Northeast Central
Says to me, this is a number of comments. He says, that's who I is. Barely say hello to you.
Oh, they're getting this other stuff. Yeah.
That's
I had met him for Bill Sutton. A few bills that Don Ritter had gotten passed for him to be Coach Thompson. Senate Coach. We had a nice conversation with Bill Sutton briefly afterwards. And I happened to see him.
Yes.
You had that stuff.
It's ready. I'll give him a copy. So give him a copy of it.
Met you once. Yeah, I think I know what he did. But I said, oh yeah, he met the White House.
You have your email and a cell phone or anything? You should get this.
Makes a list of everybody. Sorry, it actually not be flat. Oh, he does. Who is this? FDR's big campaign guy who said he knew 100,000 people by name. Can't remember his name.
I want to see what you
She was scared. I don't see her now.
It's probably right. I'm just, we're not just
No. This is
Oh, yeah, it looks a lot better now. I'm glad we got that.
So this is just.
Yeah, he's like nice. Yeah, he's good. A couple calls back, some people don't realize that, it costs real money. Call a guy when we go to, Hampton, and back twice.
Yeah.
He's like, something else. What do you think it's gonna be? Take a car service. How are you, my friend? All right, good. Flying, I hope.
Yeah, not enough ever. Specifically, now we're in PS1.
Yeah, that's gonna be aggravating.
I mean, it's aggravating.
Still out. We've got a lot of good, a lot of good people doing that.
Email me.
I can't call Friday. It was last Friday.
Oh!
Can't go to the next
I'm so sorry. You want to call tomorrow? Going out with you. Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Okay. Good seeing you as well. We're pissed off at you, by the way. Just want you to know that.
Thank you. Thanks, let me
One of my guilty pleasures is every time you're fast. Man, you got a challenge up there. At least the post is half right. I owe him. So, but it'll be fun. Yeah, congratulations. That's good. Absolutely. Let's take her. Okay, now I gotta get into this thing. Neil, you look perplexed.
It's just remembering the passwords. I'm a banker, I should remember.
You got too many passwords to remember.
How are you doing, John?
Pretty good. Yep, Michael, how are you?
Good, John. Yeah.
Never had a bad day. Evenings, they're a little rocky, but days are okay.
Thank you, sir.
The reason I'm sitting here is
You know what's on tomorrow? It's Thursday.
You both want to be my boss?
Well, no, I remember.
Okay, but you don't get mine. That's the only
Who's gonna be mine? Wanna play Thursday? Wanna play Thursday?
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not, I forgot tomorrow's Tuesday. It's tomorrow's Wednesday.
Whatever day tomorrow.
I'm in bad shape.
That could've gone bad.
Oh, yeah. See, how are you? Hold on, miss that out.
Could've been jail. Now, now it's recording. You're the guy who stood the bill and the beer on the rug too.
Hey, Chuck.
Neil,
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing? I just over at your branch a little while ago.
Which one?
Right across the street.
Oh, really? Some on the table. We're now open at Emory.
Yeah, that's too far for me to drive.
We open at Tillman Street in Allentown.
What's the
Just go
website?
to the email that I sent you yesterday and click on the link, it'll take you right to it.
Roger that.
Thank you.
You cleared for takeoff, Colin? Well, good morning. And welcome to the meeting of the Lehigh Northampton Airport Authority. I will all please stand and pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So that, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Ann Baum. John Cramsey. Brian Dames. Chuck Dykoff.
I'm on the phone.
And Brian?
Oh, hi, Brian. Chuck Dykoff.
Hi.
Mike Dowd.
Here.
Glenn Geisinger.
Here.
John Hayes.
Here.
Larry Hamburger.
Here.
Neil Copeland.
Here.
Ed Lozano.
Here.
Jeff Matzkin.
Here.
Ted Rosenberger.
Here.
Mike Schwer.
Here.
Matt Turk.
Here.
Chris Worley. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you all for coming today, particularly for a special meeting, and for those of you who had a chance to take part in the ribbon cutting this morning, thank you for taking an extended time to be with us. I want to break from the agenda for just a second, and that is to recognize our executive director. All of you have seen the news in one respect or another, some by surprise and some by plan, that Charles, after a 6-year tenure with us at LNAA, is moving on to, I think, a remarkable and very, very great opportunity for himself in New York. But I want to say, Charles, thank you very much, I think, for remarkable leadership you've shared with us. Please. Can you give us a couple of minutes of what you're going to be doing?
Yes.
You've abandoned us and you're moving on.
Sorry about that. I've been appointed the Deputy Director of Aviation, sharing leadership for the 6 airport system. They have LaGuardia, Newark, Teterboro, Stewart, and they have a management agreement with Atlantic City. Exciting times for the airport authority, the Port Authority there, in that they have significant development projects at the major airports. LaGuardia has a $4.3 billion public-private partnership that they have just started, is currently in design. Newark has a significant multi-billion-dollar project. They're putting together comparable projects at JFK. Exciting times at the Port Authority. They have probably the largest and busiest aviation system in the United States. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you very much for your support and guidance.
I think all of us are simply thrilled for your opportunity and wish you the very, very best. And, somebody's in the World Trade Center. Some of us will go down and expect lunch and a nice tour of the facility, but other than that, we wish you the very, very best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time for public comment, and I see Bob Kutzler is here.
Yes, good morning, thank you. I'm Bob Kutzler, and I'm,
It's all part of the experience.
I gotta throw things at me already.
Maybe.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Bob Kutzler. For several meetings, I've asked that the authority and the staff look into a carve-out for Braden's for the TFRs. I conceivably think that this could be a big boom for Braden's. At the same time, you could notify all the local schools that are affected by the TFRs. You could notify the local pilots that are stuck.
You want to talk to us again, for the uninitiated, what a TFR is?
Sure, the TFR is a temporary flight restriction. While the president is visiting his golf course in Bedminster, there's a flight restricted area for a 30-mile radius around Bedminster. And the inner ring, which I think is 10 miles, everybody's grounded, so they can't move their planes at all. They're stuck. So, for example, you have Sussex and Somerset, they're right there. So the guys that own airplanes can't do anything, they're grounded. And the TFR right now goes from a few days ago, whenever it started, to like the 21st. And he's coming up like every second weekend. So every second weekend, these airports are gonna be grounded. So you have your pilots that are grounded, you have the flight schools, more importantly, are grounded. Now in the outer ring, you can get a flight plan to leave. But imagine a student in Blairstown wanting to go out and practice. He's got to get a flight plan out, so that's 5 or 8, 10 minutes wasted time getting out of the TFR's area, go out and does his air work. Then he's got, well, you can file a round robin, I think, with Allentown, but you got to have a flight plan to get back in, and you can't dawdle on the way. So it's not like you can do slow flight on the way out or do a couple barrel rolls. You have to get out of the area nonstop. So the TFRs are going to be a problem ongoing, so it's not just for a few weeks, so it's going to be a regular thing. But locally, you have Sky Manor, which their schools are suffering. You've got Blairstown, you've got Andover Aeroflex. Andover Aeroflex deals a lot in tail draggers, Cubs, no radios. So even though they're in the outer ring, they still can't fly regardless. So they can't file a flight plan and say, okay, I'm going to get out of the area and go. They're completely grounded. And this is not going to be a one-call fix. This is something that you might have to make a half a dozen phone calls. And if I can give you a real quick scenario of how I work. A number of years ago, a friend of mine was working at the NSA in Maryland. They had Family Day. And we were good friends, and I had visited him at various job sites. He was in the military. So he says, hey, I'd like you to come down and take a tour of the NSA facility during Family Day. Then he found out I couldn't because I'm not family. I'm only a friend. I said, fine, give me somebody to call down there. Hello, this is Bob Kutzler. Hi, this is Sergeant so-and-so. Hey, Sarge, I'm a good friend of Dennis. I'd like to have a tour of your facility on Family Day. You're not eligible. Thank you, sir, I understand. Who's your commanding officer? Oh, that'd be Lieutenant Get a Job. So I call Lieutenant Get a Job. Lieutenant, yeah, Lieutenant, this is Bob Kutzler, friend of Dennis. I'd like to have a tour of your NSA facility. No, if you're not eligible, you're not family. Very good, sir, I understand. Who's your commanding officer? And I learned this in the military, and it works. So I talked to the captain, I talked to the major, and I talked to the colonel. When I got to the colonel said, they told me you'd be calling. All right, you're that persistent, we'll give you a pass. So I got to do the tour. So it cost me a couple of hours on the phone. I met several friendly officers in the military, and I got in. So that's the same way it is here. You're not going to make one call to the TFR or the TSA or whoever does it, I'm not sure. And they're going to say, oh, sure, it's 4 miles in, we'll give it to you. But I do know they granted for the Sussex Balloon Fest. I know there are several carve-outs along the edge right now, and they just permitted the Warren County Farmers Fair to have a balloon launch. So they do it. It's just how persistent you want to be, how important it is to you to get some extra business to Braden's. Now, I'm probably over my 3 minutes, but I apologize.
It's all right. You were
I'm
in
gonna keep
dialogue.
talking, but I
We were in
apologize.
dialogue, so you can.
Van Zants, I don't know if I mentioned Van Zants, they're in that also, they're in the TFR. They fly to Stearman, which I don't know if has a radio or not, but you could invite that up to Queen City on weekends of the TFR, so they could at least do their tours locally and still, have some revenue coming in. The flight plans, I talked to that earlier when somebody asked me. And again, it's how important it is to you. The schools might come up with a couple planes for the weekend or for a week. The pilots might decide to move their planes out here if they can't fly at all. And they're going to buy fuel, so it's going to be a good move for you. It's going to be good PR. And who's to say that down the line, one of those schools might say, you know what? That's a nice little airport on the fringe. Maybe we'll move an auxiliary school out there. We have an instructor from that area. We'll park one of our planes there and let them work out of there.
Bob, how far is Braden in? Did you say 3 or 4 miles?
I've heard anywhere from 1 mile to 4.5. It depends on who you talk
Now,
to.
what is it? Is it Pocono Mountain that has the carve out? They're right on the ring. I know one of them up there. I could look at my.
Yeah, I forget, but there are several going around, and I don't know how deep they'll let you go. I guess it depends on how many phone calls you make and how persistent you are. You might have to go to the colonel or the chief of staff to get the answer.
Who is the controller?
It's
Is it
3.7
TS? Is it
It's Federal
TSA?
Aviation Administration.
FAA is
They
the.
actually issue the TFR.
All right,
But that pretty much.
yes. Who's that?
This is Brian. I just wanted to, could I make a quick comment?
Sure. Go
So
ahead.
Trenton Airport, M37 has a cutout around it. They're on the southern end. Doylestown Airport has a cutout around it. They're on the southeast side. Two little Penn Ridge has a cutout, and also a little airport called Elephant Path. And then on the north side, East Stroudsburg, or the Stroudsburg Airport also has a cutout. Sussex has a cutout. Greenwood has a cutout as you go around the circle.
So it's not impossible to
Someone
get it.
that
I'm telling you, it's not impossible.
it's not impossible to get it. According to my measurement, just on what's depicted, it looks like Braden is just a hair under 4 miles outside or inside the TFR,
All right.
or whatever that's worth.
Any other questions for Bob?
Yeah, what is necessary for the authority to take some action to do as you propose, which I think is a good idea?
Good question. Yeah.
No. All right, Bob, thank you.
One other quick topic. This is a different topic. Over on the field, we have the permanent bathroom that's no longer accessible. And I don't know what it was, Darren, a year and a half ago, I asked you to look into maybe proposing a new one so that when this one went down, with knocking it down with the expansion, we'd have something in line. And my question is, have you thought about putting a regular fixed bathroom in for the pilots on the field rather than the porta-johns? But that was my other thing, to see how we're progressing. Because I don't know what you have to do to put one in, but we have the hangar 5 over there, and you're more than welcome to attach it to our building. But thank you for your time,
All right,
and
thanks, Bob.
see you next month.
We are working with
All right,
the developer to get that done as part of the project.
all right. Thank you. The question becomes, well, let's put this, that discussion in the parking lot, make sure we deal with it in the agenda, because I think there's probably going to be a new business issue for us to deal with the TFR and see what our strategy is going to be.
Eddie had sent me an email about it, and staff started to investigate the process.
All right, so we're already on, oh, good.
Yes.
Who's responsible for that on staff?
That'll be Tom.
All right. So excellent, thank you. Thanks for raising the question, Ed, and thanks for raising the question, Bob. So we are going to do something about it. Having done that, the minutes of our meeting were distributed to you electronically, and they're also available to you certainly electronically in our books. And so, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as distributed?
So moved.
A motion, we have a second? Bob, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lozano, financial report.
Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure again to report a good month here this past June. So as you can see on the chart on the overhead, our revenues came in at $2.1 million, continuation of the great first half performance of the year. 29% ahead of last year in terms of revenues and 5% ahead of budget. Now, that was primarily driven by what we've seen in the past few months, strong Allegiant traffic, and cargo, and the flow-through revenues that are associated with those. So another great month of overall revenue growth, month to date. Expenses, very well managed. I mean, this is another consistent that we've seen at the authority. The plan was for $1.6 million, and staff brought it in at 1.57, as you can see. So ahead 39% from last year, but under budget 2%, and that's favorable. So that was great performance. Great to see staff managing the expenses appropriately. Depreciation was the one area that came in a little bit off of what has been historically pretty consistent. I'm going to have Todd explain that briefly, but it is just more of a conservative accounting approach that staff is taking this month, but I'll pass it over to Todd.
Good afternoon, everyone. The depreciation number, we estimate it's depreciation for projects that are kind of in progress, that are not completed. So the way that usually the accounting works is once you put them in the actual service, full service, is when you start depreciating. So we put an estimated number in there so it wouldn't be a big hit. Obviously, we're out there with the multimodal, so you got a lot of things that are about to start to hit that depreciation line. So we just wanted to kind of get a little jump on it with the depreciation. It is consistent with the year-to-date numbers that we put out there. So a lot of it is because we haven't booked some of those things because they're not in service yet. So it's like, rather than wait, let's put an estimate in there.
Any questions on depreciation? So principally because of that variance in depreciation, we have a slight underperformance on net income, basically flat to last year, and a little bit off trend. As you know, in the last few months, we've been significantly ahead on a month-to-date basis on net income. So this year, we actually came flat to last year and significantly ahead of plan.
In absence of $80,000, we'd be ahead of plan.
Correct. So that's basically the month-to-date results. I'll take any questions if you have any. So why don't we go to the next page? So now this is the first full half-year performance, and as you can see, when you smooth out everything, it's still strong performance, 27% ahead of last year on net revenue. So we came in at almost $13 million at the first half of the year, and that's 8% ahead of budget. Very impressive, and again, driven by principally strong Allegiant traffic, strong cargo traffic, strong aviation services that are associated with those two drivers. However, slightly offset by a decrease in our legacy carrier traffic. So actually, passenger traffic is down, which I'll show in the next slide, but relatively nominally, and again, offset by Allegiant. The only other aspect of slow traffic on the legacy carriers is our roadways and parking is slightly down as well. So those two smaller buckets are down versus the overall bucket, which is cargo and Allegiant, et cetera, and the flow through. So the good news is, first half of the year, we came in 8% over budget and 27% ahead of last year. Very strong performance. Reiterating great work on controlling expenses. So planned for roughly 27%, I think it was, increase versus last year, came in at 26, 2% under budget. Depreciation, as you can see, when you smooth out the first half of the year, we're pretty much on target. 7% ahead of last year, which was planned, only 1% ahead of budget. And this is where the net income still is continuing to be strong. When you smooth out the whole year, with the exception of 1 month, you have 58% versus previous year and 126%, versus plan. So we're at $2.2 million net income, very solid performance. And at this point, we foresee that, the balance of the year is going to be, I guess, projected towards plan. First couple of months, remember, we were out of the gates pretty strong. We didn't know what the rest of the year was going to look like. But now with 6 months under your belt, pretty consistent KPI performance, we are confident that, the plan numbers will be met.
And I want to just throw in a couple things because we're at the halfway point and it's important. Because one of the things you said, that $2.2 million number there, it's really important to understand where our net profits come from. And basically 72% of that number comes from our parking. So that which flows to the bottom line. So that's why we get a little bit of concern when the parking revenue is down, because from a net income perspective, that's what generates a lot of our profits. The next thing, which is really important to point out, is our ground handling. Even though we're still kind of in its infancy, it's actually making a profit now, even counting the depreciation. So again, that's a good sign for us. But again, the last half of the year, normally the last quarter is when we have a lot of backloaded expenses. So we're out of the gates pretty good, a lot ahead of our budget and last year. But those are just things to keep in mind. I just wanted to point that out because we're at halfway point of the year.
Okay. This is just a graphic representation of what we just talked about. So as you can see clearly on pretty much all the metrics, significantly ahead of last year and plan. And then here's where I was referencing. We're down 2.4% for the month on passenger traffic. In this month, interestingly, it was driven, even though Allegiant was up 20%, there were quite a few cancellations, principally due to weather, et cetera. So staff feels pretty confident that the passenger traffic count would have been flat to up had there not been some cancellations on Allegiant's part due to extracurricular traffic and weather. So barring that, the legacy carriers also have been a little bit down consistently. So, that was what's holding down that. One, Allegiant was up 20%. Had it not been for a lot of cancellations, probably would have been up 30% plus. However, offset by the legacy carrier weakness. But overall, negative 2.4%, not too bad. And as Todd pointed out previously, this is important principally because it does flow through to the parking, which is an important profit generator for our system. So we hope that these numbers improve, and Allegiant has been performing strongly with the exception of this past month. So if they get back on track, if there's no major incidents, et cetera, we expect to have a pretty decent second half. Any questions?
I just had a quick question on the legacy carriers.
Yep.
Is it that they're offering fewer seats or they're selling fewer seats?
No, they're not offering fewer seats. I think their load factors are down a bit at this point in time. What we've heard from them are their yields are up. The yields are very good. So it's sort of hard to get them to.
Are the yield means?
Basically what they're making off those seats, So that's the pricing is probably, their fares are a little higher than they have been in the past, which they kind of fluctuate. So it's just a matter of, we try to work with them to find out why and what we can do with it. But they're producing good yields. It's probably hard to get them to make a big change at this point in time. So they're still happy. They're still, they're happy with what they're doing here. So that's the good thing. But we'd certainly like to see them filling a few more seats too. So.
Thanks, and that's a good question, and I think we'll start mining that in the second half and just getting a little bit more insight into what's driving that decline or that softness. Questions? Thanks. The following page is obviously very detailed, and I think there's a couple of key highlights, Todd, that we want to walk through in terms of the Braden cash. Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Yeah. If you look on here, and I tried the number to make it a little easier, but if you look at line, I guess that's line 11 with the BMO lease reimbursements, that's one of the things I have up there. It's a $500,000. These are actually July, October, December. You have the full 12 months in your pack. We just tried to shrink them so you can see them on the screen. That $500,000, one of the things on the docket today is approving the lease reimbursement line. And before, we would actually get it reimbursed right away. With our old leasing company now, it's kind of a reimbursement. So we've already fronted that money, so that's kind of us saying, hey, we're going to get some of that money back. So that's why that's there. The other item that I wanted to point out is that item up there under number 7 where it says unbudgeted expenses. When we got our refund for our self-funded, one of the things that Ted, I believe, suggested is we put some of that money aside for our pension shortfall. So we didn't have that budgeted, so that's the $200,000 that we put there in that number. That wasn't originally budgeted. Obviously, we'll see how the second half of the year goes, but it's sitting there right now because we're anticipating paying it if things go the way they are. And then the last thing we put it on there is number 23, is we got the money for the Northampton grant up front. So that's just us showing the kind of the management of that money over the next 12 months. So we anticipated spending some money in July and bringing it down to 218.
So 31,000 of the 250.
Because it was 250, but we're just showing it there to kind of show that management in the cash flow. Any questions?
Anything else, Ed?
One more, and I guess we'll just then wrap up on the, we're going to track this a little bit in terms of the current ratio. We just kind of talked about, assets versus kind of liabilities. And just to give you an idea, again, historically, if you go to last year, January, February, March, our financial state wasn't so strong. The ratio was kind of weak. But then all of a sudden, things started to improve. And, what we'll do is just keep an eye on this. It'll just give you a little bit of a health indication on the financials overall from a very 40,000 foot standpoint. But nonetheless, I think it's good to just keep track of it just to make sure that, from a financial standpoint, asset versus liability ratio is strong. So as you can see, June was 2.69, very comfortable position for the authority. And so we'll check in on this regularly, but just again, wanted to refresh everybody's memory on
Right on that, I just want to point out just one thing, because one of the things that gets lost on this is, we're talking about our overall financial situation. This is our liquidity. This is really our ability to pay our debt. So, we want that number to at least have enough in the current position to cover our current debts. We're above 1, so we're in good shape. And as Eddie pointed out, we're just monitoring it. Right now, we're at 2.65. But again, it's really about liquidity so that we have enough to kind of cover us. So that's really the main focus of this number.
Okay, so then in summary, revenue is strong, again, driven by principally Allegiant and cargo and flow through. Legacy passenger traffic has been soft, offset again by Allegiant. And I think Ann raised a great point. Let's just mine that a little bit deeper and see if we can somehow impact that and help with the legacy traffic. And the overall strong point is net income has been extraordinarily strong. So it's been managed well because expenses have been managed and the profitability has been flowing through nicely to the bottom line. So overall, great performance in the first half. Looking forward to hopefully continued performance like that in the second half. So that's my report, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Do we have a motion to approve the financial report? A second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Just let me add a parenthetic note in that these reports have come a long way from the time where we'd say our bank balances are and move on to the next one. And so you and Todd have become a good team, and I do appreciate that. And
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Todd.
I think we have a much better handle on where we are in every respect. So thanks to both of you for cooperating and working with me. Let's dig down into the agenda. And the first one that comes to the executive committee is stormwater easement with Rockefeller Group. And Aaron, do you want to raise that?
Sure, thanks, Mike. So this is just for information at this point in time. We had actually hoped to maybe bring it for approval, but it's not quite ready. So we're getting close to another closing with Rockefeller on property in Allen Township. So we had to sort of redraw the lot lines a little bit, and we're selling them an easement as part of it, as opposed to selling the entire property, basically to protect our flight path, so protecting our runway 1331 flight path. So they're paying the same as the purchase price. It'll be about a 10.4 acre easement, so it's $430-some thousand that they'll pay for that easement. Just wanted to sort of brief everybody because it's a little bit different than what we were talking about before. So it'll be that, and then the sale will come along with it. So these will both come back to the board next month. Is the plan to bring them back for approval, and then we would expect closing fairly soon after that next board meeting on the next parcel. So just information only. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything on them.
Those will be reserved funds then? What the funds?
It's similar to the last sale. So they would be, AIP restricted funds from that sale.
Any other questions? If you have any, give Darren a call. I'm sure he'll be glad to lay the detail out for us, but we expect to have that on the September meeting.
That is certainly the plan at this point, so hopefully.
which at the moment we're looking to be potentially the public meeting where we would move it to an evening agenda meeting and open it up to the public as we pledged to do last year. Excellent, thank you. And then approval of the Cushman-Wakefield recommendations. And I spoke to the gentleman from Cushman-Wakefield. One of the things I teach in management is when you make a mistake, admit it quickly and emphatically. And I was not one who was in favor necessarily of rejecting all 5 proposals and soliciting new ones. And I was appropriately chagrined when 10 came in. And so my apologies to them and my thanks to them for giving us some good direction. I think you saw in the initial notification that we did receive 10 proposals. Darren, do you want to address those? And if you've all seen the details of those, so.
Yeah, all the proposals were in Nova, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at them. And so we did. We received 10, which was great. It was, actually 6 new proposals because one of the originals did drop out and did not respond. So I think we got 10 very good proposals from 10, obviously, very qualified developers. The way the RFP was written was to eliminate those down to a smaller number going forward. We're sort of back and forth speaking with Jeff and Adam from Cushman-Wakefield. Their recommendation is to move all 10 groups and continue working through to keep more in the process. So I think it's at this point, it's a board decision at this point to figure out which way we go. There's definitely a 5 that we did agree on were probably the top 5 out of that group. And those would have been Kinsley Properties, Majestic, Matrix, Petrucci, and Trammell Crow. So based on some factors, obviously somewhat subjectively, because we don't have final pricing and those types of things at this point in time to compare, but looking at what they do, types of development they've done, understanding the challenges of the zoning up there, just so trying to get an idea of who has the best chance of kind of navigating that and everything. So those are the top 5, but like I said, the recommendation from the consultant is to move 10 forward, so we would just put it back to the board, and obviously Jeff and Adam are here and happy to answer
Jeff
questions
and Adam,
as well.
You want to make any comments? Do you care to make a comment?
This is Adam. I'll just make a quick comment that, and Darren pretty well covered it. We can go any number of paths, and the reason that we maybe for a brief period would suggest the 10 would be there is some uncertainty with piece of ground with townships. We want to make sure that we give ample time for people to submit, and then along with that is pricing. So how do people look at what they can do, price it? They're not just going to simply give us a price based on acreage. They're going to give us a price based on what they can do and how much of it. And then lastly, we are in the Lehigh Valley, and as everyone knows, people are trying to place money in industrial, flex, and other development. So while we would typically see 10 proposals and say, hey, these guys are not qualified, you actually got 10 bona fide qualified developers that have recent and relevant experience. But to Darren's point, the point of the RFP was to get maybe the best 5. So either way, the case could be made to get it down and proceed with the previous path, and the case could be made that we could be surprised by one that we would eliminate that would come through.
But you would not be uncomfortable with those top 5?
We would not be uncomfortable.
And I would say that would be the recommendation of staff, is to take it down to 5. But again, understanding there's certainly pros and cons to either way.
What are the next steps?
Next step for us would be obviously sitting down with each of those folks. I think for them to better understand what we're looking for, a little better understand what they're looking for. The other sort of parallel path is to have some more conversation with the township to again understand what we may be able to do and sort of how they want to work the process. I think especially if we go with more than 5 developers, they probably don't want 10 different developers coming knocking on their door to talk to them about this one property. So I think we could hopefully find a more efficient way to work with the township on that. And then from there, it would be giving them that 90-day period to do whatever due diligence they are comfortable with. Assuming they'll do some and probably not a ton. Knowing that they still don't have assured of getting the project, and then they would come back at the end of that 90 days with more solid proposals with some pricing involved. So then we could select it down to hopefully a couple that we would negotiate with to actually get through to get a partner by sometime early in the 2018.
I don't like the word hopefully. I'd like to see us get it down too. I don't like words like hopefully.
I think I meant hopefully we'll have at least 2 or 3 left is where I'm at. Not hopefully that we will get it down.
I think it's interesting if the board has the opportunity to read through the Novus proposals, and some are 30 pages, some are over 100 pages. Some have taken the opportunity to do land development plans that incorporate pro forma zoning. Others have looked at it. Here's the relief we need. Here's the development yields. As Adam and Jeff point out, there's no math attached to it yet, but it's just interesting to see how different developers would approach different uses, for example, some retail, some park space, some industrial, some LVIP, smaller type buildings. There's a different mix and different mindsets from the different developers. So I think it goes back to, it's nice to have a third party on board that's doing this every day and can kind of cull this down to through the process. But until we get to the modeling, and a couple of the initial RFQs had some basic financial modeling in there as to how the deals would flow down as partnerships with ground leases, and not to get into the weeds here, but how the dollars flow. And I think it ultimately will be important for everybody around the table to understand how that happens. And also the timeline. A couple of proposals go into 6 to 9 months of zoning dialogue, discussions and planning, and then another 5 to 6 months of approvals. And so you're looking at from day one, 15 to 16, 18-month process before shovels get put in the ground. So it's important for everyone to understand the time horizons as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be obviously very important. We're going to be some sort of a partner in this venture, whether it's just as a lessor or something further. So we want to make sure that we're going with the right partner at the end of the day. And we're going to be partners with them for probably a pretty long time. So
that's the goal.
So I think it's certainly very important that we get the right one. We don't want to start this thing off on the wrong foot for sure.
Len, you got a comment or question?
Well, my question is to the gentleman from Christian Wakefield. If you identified 5 that you feel are superior or better suited or whatever word you want to use, why keep the other 5 on? What's the advantage?
I guess the advantage would be, does somebody, one of the 5 that would not be included, do they surprise us with pricing? Do they spend more time and effort, come in with something that would be advantageous to us? So I guess that's where we feel maybe you can keep everybody in or support people in to get to that next stage for pricing. I think that's where we want to get to. The bottom line is see everybody's financial model on the 290 acres, and then it's an easier objective sort of discussion as to who could be the best partner.
Do you feel that by keeping the other 5 on board, it would delay the process at all?
The case could be made for that. I guess on qualifications, the other 5 are we're not saying that they're not qualified. We're just saying if you look at the RFQ and the time that was spent, and the top 5 call-up responders, they did a better job, not necessarily at the end of the day that they would be more qualified. As I mentioned before, you have the benefit of seeing 10 qualified developers that have recent experience, that all done similar projects. But to Jeff's point, we also kept in a few people that have the ability to do flex or smaller retail, and not just give you 5 big box developers that are going to run for the hills as soon as downtown says, no thanks, we don't want that. We try to keep a mix. We try to keep people that have some recent relevant experience, but again, the 5 that we would admit potentially could come through with the best pricing. So we were just trying to be sensitive to the board that if you wanted to go outside, color outside the lines on recommending 5 and just say, hey, maybe we'll look at pricing first, and then, as Jeff mentioned, more quickly get down to a smaller list. Sorry to give you maybe 2 paths to go down, but just wanted to give you the pros and cons.
No, and I appreciate that, because I was in the same seat as Chairman Dowd, that I really was not in favor of going back to this process. I felt like that may create issues for us, and it did. I mean, we got 10 qualified people to come in, and that's great. I just don't want to see it delayed any more than it has to be.
I think we are. I don't say under the gun, but I think all of us at some point want to move this process forward. We've been ruminating about it for a long time, and we have some great financial opportunities, but I think we want to do appropriate justice to the opportunities. But I continue to say I'd love to see us by March, when Chuck becomes chair, hopefully, that we've got the developer identified and we're
2 parking spaces.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do.
That's not
doing it for 1.
1 parking space is on the grass between 2 police cars.
You probably got a ticket too by now.
You had mentioned that staff recommended the 5. What's driving that recommendation?
Well, I think the thinking behind when we developed the RFP was, if you have a smaller group going into the second round, you've got to
feel special.
I think it makes them feel they've got a better chance of being the ultimate partner at the end of the day, and it incentivizes them to probably work a little harder, in the second round, and I think that's, so how much that influences them, I don't really know, but that's certainly that was the reasoning behind the way the RFQ was drafted.
I think our original goal was to move it down to call through the group and come down to a recommended. Chuck and Eddie?
Yeah, I want to comment that I'm glad that there's 10 now, and I like the idea of diversity because then you have non-traditional, let's just say, developers that are in the mix now. And you never know when some of those non-mainstream ideas can come through and be the best fit for us. Number two is, I do wonder that, if we're saying during the RFP process that you had some guys who submitted 10 pages and some guys who submitted 100 pages, were we very specific in terms of what our expectations were? Not a criticism, but for me, it's right now, I'd like to keep 10 without going into the weeds on this, but make sure it's a very definitive timeline and expectation such that we can then cull it down very quickly. Because my understanding, and I could be wrong, is right now, basically, we just did a credentials kind of presentations, right? So all we're basically saying is these guys submitted their qualifications.
Well, we asked for qualifications, and we asked for, I believe it was termed a high-level concept plan.
Okay.
And some of them gave us that, some of them did not.
Two ways, I'm sorry, Chuck.
I was just going to add, we talked to all 10 before they submitted, and we told them, follow the RFQ, make sure you answer everything, here's kind of the highlights. Some followed that, some didn't.
I would only add to that we took some liberties with how they responded to make sure that we had diversified participants in the top 5. So if we had just, this is not what happened, but if the top 5 best responders were all the same type of developer, we would be hesitant to just include the best responders so that RFQ, because we're not diversified. If the zoning is restricted down to small box similar to across the street here, we did take some liberties with us knowing and having experience with these developers who would be best suited to do that, and not just how pretty the cover page was for
That's the reason we're really glad you were part of the process, because I think we need that kind of expertise and that sensitivity to the process.
I want to follow a counterpoint to Teddy's comment. In terms of the responders to the RFQ, if they didn't respond completely, then I would exclude from the next round, simply because if they didn't take the time now.
That's the point of our recommendation.
There definitely were some that seemed to be sort of, I'm going to check the box and say I put in a response. I mean, there were definitely a few, not all of them, but there were a few that were like that.
Top 5 that didn't answer the RFQ as intended?
I mean, I'm trying to think exactly all the top 5. I don't know that.
The top 5 all responded. Yes, they did. And for the most part, everyone at least acknowledged parts of the RFQ. Others did better than others. And again, we took liberties with knowing in the next phases how people will approach things. As you all know, sometimes people take, well, we just need to do this to get into the next round, and some really, as maybe the top 2 recommendations, went maybe more above and beyond.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. I think speaking to a couple of board members who went through the RFPs, or RFPQs, some really did go into great depth. But some of this is always credentialing. You want to have your foot in the door, so at the very least you have the opportunity to be looked in second place. But I guess my own thought is I'd rather see us go with the top 5 rather than open the door to 10, and then we're still going to be going through 10 in detail, which I think is going to be remarkably time consuming.
Darren, and that was my question, is that the next round then is to select somebody.
Right. Yeah. I remember, potentially select a couple to negotiate with at least.
With 10 people versus 5 people, I think it was a lot more intensive.
I think there would be certainly a larger burden on staff and honestly a lot more work for our consultant as well, which, not that they wouldn't like to have more work, but certainly costs us more money. So, you know what I mean?
We felt that we would be remiss to not point out that there's a difference between maybe ultimately higher pricing by whatever amount we can't define for speed and time investment of the board and consultants.
And these top 5 are ones that you feel are the top 5?
We feel like, based on the criteria of diversification of their capabilities and their experience with their responsiveness to the RFQ, the time investment that we think their participants or their employees will take, yes, could the case be made that the other people are, at the end of the day, as qualified? Again, it is a bit subjective at this point, but we feel confident.
And in the next round, it'll be very objective. So it'll be easier to kind of see where people get slotted.
Didn't we have 5 the first time around?
We did.
Yeah. And are these a better 5 in your professional opinion now? Because the whole reason that we opened it back up is we were nervous that 5 would reduce down to, just a few.
Oh, yeah.
But I would, 5, and those would be the 5 that are absolutely the most qualified, and they're busy, or they don't have a great conversation with the township, and they're out. And then there is a sensitivity to then going back to the other 5 and say, "Oh, remember us?" Well,
Or if you could do like 6, or, just 6 or 7, or I don't know.
I mean, again, I think our recommendation would still be at 5, but it's up, if the board thinks that 6 is a better number, we can probably pick the 6th one.
Now we have 5, now we're going to be picking one of the remaining 5. The fact is, our consultant's going to be continually kept on board, presuming to help us go through this process, because we're looking at a very, very sophisticated development project. One of which we do not have the expertise in-house on the authority, or frankly with the staff to do that kind of deal. We really need somebody who can give us the appropriate kind of guidance as we move through this, because it's going to be our long-term future. So I think we need to be sure we do this justice. But in the same vein, continue. If I think about what Bert Dady would be saying, he'd be saying, "Let's pull the trigger and keep on going, guys." I think. But any others?
Do you feel you can quantifiably differentiate the 10 developers, beyond just, the credentials, and some kind of did a little bit more?
Yeah, this
and the
wasn't all
conceptual,
just a
et
gut feel, and there was a lot of good discussion between us and Darren, back and forth, and Matthew, sitting down, reviewing everything, giving, our opinions and going through the RFPs, and kind of how we see this transacting, down the road, the challenges that the site has.
You're in a great position. I mean, people that we're eliminating have very recent, relevant industrial development experience in the Lehigh Valley. So to show you how maybe thin our rankings are, we have people that are developing up 33 that are on the west end of the valley that have experience and own property in the community. So we feel confident in all of them, but again, we're respectful of the time and the process as well. So.
We actually should feel grateful here, because I can remember times sitting on this board, and prior to, we might have one person. Now we've got 10.
Yep.
So let's take the time and vet these people and see what does make sense. Although, to John's point, if someone may have already eliminated themselves if they didn't play by the rules with kind of the RFP or RFQ, whatever we're calling it, which would shrink it on its own.
If I follow parliamentary procedure, we really would have a motion on the floor and a second, and then we can have more robust conversation. So not to cut down conversation, but I'd entertain a motion at this point to pick the top 5 and see if we can get a motion on the floor that at least we can decide.
So moved.
A motion, we have a second. Second, motion and second. All right, let's continue the discussion, but at least we have now a motion on the floor to deal with the top 5 as recommended by Cushman and staff. Ann?
Are there, of the remaining, of the bottom 5, how many of those didn't, with your coaching, do what you asked them to do? Is it all 5 of them that didn't provide a complete response, or is there a
I would
subset?
say most of them at least, again, touched on what you asked them to do. I would say the difference between the top 5 and the other is that 2 or 3 of the top 5 went above and beyond, or went the extra mile. A few in the bottom 10, maybe 8 to 10 fell a little short. But the difference between number 4 and number 7, frankly, wasn't great. And again, some people we put in the top weren't the best responders, but we know their qualifications to do maybe the smaller product if it goes that direction. So we were aware of and kept that in mind in the recommendation.
If I could jump in, I think that we're definitely out of those bottom 5. There were a few that were very almost non-responsive. I think everybody had to some end, but there were definitely at least a couple that we kind of read through and said, like I said, it was almost like we got their marketing brochure that they put out, and there was really no real talk about the property itself or anything. So it's almost like they hadn't even really looked at what they were proposing for. It's just let's get it, like we said, let's get the name in there and see what happens. But
I felt like 2 were really strong out of them.
Yeah, I think we would all agree with that.
I read 2 of them did the exercise
and
and
beyond.
beyond.
That would probably.
And if I were in my private world again, and I was the land seller, I could walk away today with 2. and know that they both have the ability to take this.
And those are the two that have been around from literally probably 3 years or more talking to us about this property.
Right.
So they've been here from the beginning.
I think 5 is okay.
I would also just, the board is aware that when we open this back up, people that are at the top did have the experience, so when they come back in, they've had the time to run through that over a few years. There are a few people that maybe weren't aware of the project when we opened this back up, so their time to respond was a little short compared to others that have been hanging around for 2 or 3 years. But again, there's no black and white defined response here. We just, our job, make sure you're aware of the pros and cons of each. But also, to Darren's point, call it 8 through 10, while they are qualified industrial developers, maybe didn't do the best job of getting proposed plans and telling you or everything you wanted to hear. But those that have made it, that have some diversified ability to do smaller box, probably given a little bit more leniency than others.
Okay. Glenn?
Well, and I think there's a point there that I hear coming through that it's really easy to respond to an RFP that you've responded to in the past and been working for 3 years. If I was working with a client and I had pitched them 3 years ago and nothing had changed in their situation other than the lapse of 36 months, and I had been part of that process, I'd have a pretty good pitch already ready to go that I could pull out of the box and turn really quickly. Whereas those that brought themselves into the process more recently because of opening it back up, maybe they didn't have sufficient time to really get all the I's dotted and T's crossed. And while I was against, and I'm going to say this again, I was against opening this up because I want to move this forward. I'm more against, at this point, eliminating anybody until we at least see some pricing numbers. And I think that if they come back and don't really now put the energy in, they're going to eliminate themselves. It's going to be very, very simple to look at the bottom 4 or 5.
Oh, without a doubt. I agree with that too. On the other side, right, it's not going to take a lot of consulting time. When you look at numbers and you put them on a spreadsheet, right? I don't disagree with that on the other side right now. Right. So
even if you went to 5, our recommendation would not be to just cut them loose at this point and run around and go to the township and do a whole bunch of environmentals and surveys themselves. Our goal would be to get from them pricing if we can.
Okay, so your recommendation would be, the next step would be what?
In any way.
I guess the next, so they have, 90 days to understand the site, conduct their due diligence. We want to sit down and meet with them prior so we can set expectations, what our expectations are going to be. So we're not doing that after the fact. So they have a full timeline to do what they need to do. We need to address the township zoning issue and how best to navigate those waters. And so when they do respond, we're going to be extremely specific. Here's what you're going to have to respond to. Here's how we're going to, here's the criteria. We want pricing, we want plans, we want X, Y, and Z. And I think it'll be a much easier discussion once we get that in to understand who's really engaged in this opportunity to go forward. It'll be an easier decision or a different debate once we get those back.
And that would be the same recommendation, whether that's 10 to 2 or 5 to 1. It's really that same process, I believe.
And just to understand and get this point that this is moving forward through your process, which seems to be very disciplined, you expect them to be coming back a recommendation for a single path forward, one of these 5 individuals.
Well, I think after the next, I don't know if Darren alluded to it a little sooner. I think after this round, 5, then it's narrowed down to 2 or even 3. I mean, I like to see how everybody responds. It might just be one that really stands out to negotiate with, to really fine tune those negotiations to have a selected bidder.
And the process will help to eliminate that. If everyone is telling us the same thing from the township, we're probably going to be left with only those that can be flexible on what the township is going to allow them to do. And that's going to eliminate 70% of the respondents.
I think to Darren's point, we don't want 10 developers running to Jay and to John and saying, let me sit down and talk to you about zoning.
Right. Yeah, we were sensitive to that, and that's a concern of ours, yeah.
Chuck and I had a meeting with them a while ago and got the gospel about what they're interested in. And I think that's not necessarily without opportunity to modify, but I mean, they were reasonably adamant as to what their expectations would be. So I don't think 10 people going to them and having that same discussion is going to help us.
We agree.
Moving forward.
So our plan, and I know the board is, or at least staff has said, for Cushman to be a little bit of a buffer between you all and the township, to at least go have preliminary conversations, guide those, whether it's 2, 10, or 5 respondents that hold off and let at least us go in and have some preliminary conversations. This is our intent.
So your thought would be continuing on a contractual relationship that we'd have to review, and I guess be sure that that you would become the buffer between the authority and the developer and the township?
Just for the concern that you raised, that we're not saying, hey, congratulations, you made the next round, and then everyone is surprising the township.
You would help us then with the vetting, taking it down perhaps to an ideal 3, or whatever that number might be?
Yeah, I think.
I don't think we're going to come back here and have 5 and then begin doing that ticking process in public.
I think the next round, when we get these notices in, it'll be a very objective kind of discussion, and to understand who's interested, their pricing structure, their thoughts on the site, timing, things like that, capabilities. I think it'll be a much easier process. I know this wasn't easy opening it back up, getting more in, reviewing them, and coming up with this list, but I think it'll get a lot easier going forward. And I think as we go forward, we just want to be there for them, understand what they're hearing with the township, understand what they're doing due diligence-wise on the site, so we can make good recommendations at the end of that process.
Just to get some sense of general assent or general discussion, does that sound like a plan to move forward, or do you want to?
I kind of want to refer back to what we've done a couple of times, and I know it's hard on the board and staff in terms of time, but to me, it kind of brings to light very clearly the prospective partner, like we did with the auditor, and we did with the attorneys. Something like this, of this magnitude, Mike, and I think just the visionary aspects of it, to me, is it possible to just take this, whether it's 5 or 10, and have those developers come in with 15-minute, very specific, requirements to present to the board on, here's our financials, here's the plan, the concept, land use, barriers, opportunities, very simple, very cut and dry, but something that's very comparable, so that A, I think the board will be educated on what we're kind of eventually going to be voting on, and B, we can kind of see the strengths and weaknesses of these, because it's hard for me as a non-real estate person. I mean,
and if I could jump in,
and others, but.
I mean, that is basically the way the RFP is written again. So they would have their time to do the due diligence. Before we would go down to picking 1 or 2 to negotiate with, they would come back with a presentation. That was part of the process, the way it's been designed.
Correct. And I think we do that at the tail end. In this one, what I'm suggesting is, can we do it a little bit on the front end? Because the way I've seen these kind of things in the past, and not real estate related, but some people just don't interview very well on the front end, which is my comparison to the credentials presentations. But some of them have the best ideas, or ultimately may present something that is, breakthrough, et cetera. So
I think the due diligence gives them the time to basically come up with those concepts. I just think it's going to be hard, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, to really come in and give a great presentation on what they're going to do with the property before they have a little bit of time.
Almost be to show up with what a contract and a structure would look like in advance of their due diligence. If you're looking for something tangible, in addition to having someone come and talk to you for 10, 15, 20 minutes, you could almost make the case that show up with contract pricing. I mean, it's still going to be subject to due diligence, but you'll at least see where someone is in the ballpark.
But I agree. I think you need to spend time with the developers, because this is going to be a marriage. This is going to be a long-term sort of project. There's going to have to be a good working relationship that you guys feel comfortable with. So at some stage, I would assume they'd come in for the full board presentation. I think maybe at this stage it was going to be a smaller group, kind of vetting them out and being more day to day. But I wouldn't be opposed to that, because I think you guys need to have a good comfort level with your partner at the end of the day.
This is not a sale and let your money go away. As Dan mentioned at the outset, this is at least some level of partnership with this developer.
I think the fact is, if the authority members are prepared to be committed at this point to saying, we're going to take a morning, we're going to get here at 8, and we're going to work through till noon, or whatever, with that time, I don't have a problem with doing that at all. I wouldn't mind meeting them. I think it's imperative for us to make the right decision in this case. I feel a need to pull the trigger and move on. I mean, I think we all feel the terror of time, I guess, but at the same time, we need to make the right decision. I'm not at all opposed to going back to them saying, come back with a much more, more robust proposal, give us the financials, give us a real sense of how this thing would play out. I would hate to then have this meeting, have 3 of us show up. Well, if the 3 of us show up, I guess that would be the decision, but I have no problem with doing that.
So in writing, I mean, again, these different paths, if we were gonna say 10, it would just be because we haven't seen people's absolute pricing all in what their plan is. If we were to just go and look at these based on the proposals, again, Jaren's point, we're comfortable with the 5 continuing with the process. You said, hey, let's keep a couple more people in, we'd be comfortable there. So it really is a board decision on the time investment, the speed that Mike mentioned.
Well, if we would say to 10, you have 90 days. We want you back here before Thanksgiving of 2017. Be prepared to spend time with us. We want to meet you. We want to touch the fabric before we buy the suit, and we want to have that kind of conversation. Come and make your best proposal. Is that feasible?
I think it's feasible within 90 days. I think it could be feasible within 60 days.
All right.
I think you're probably going to get, frankly, a couple people that like the one that failed out last time. It could be as simple as we like the project, but we only have so many people on staff, and I'm sorry we can't allocate the time, or our funds are no longer allocated to Lehigh Valley. I would doubt that would happen, but you never know. So people might eliminate themselves for different reasons.
So Matt, you're involved in this.
I was just going to offer that, I mean, if somebody, these proposals, to unfortunately counter your point, that they don't age well necessarily. It's not that it's going to get a lot better the next time you meet them. So if this is a long-term development partnership that we would have with an entity, we would want to have somebody who puts their best foot forward initially. And in the interest of reducing the number, I don't know if the number is 5, 8, 10, whatever it is, but really the less you have to look at, the better off you are in making a decision. If we're going to put 10 on the table and invite 10 developers to propose to us, I've been through this process with other consultants in the past where, yeah, exactly, number 7 all of a sudden looks like an absolute nutcase, but if they had been first, then they might have been great, When you get too many in there, it just becomes untenable.
To me, it's very confusing.
We agree on just overanalyzing proposals. The only reason the 10 option is out there is if the board wanted to say, let's look at, to oversimplify it, if you want to go the route of 10, let's see what they want to offer you guys first. If it's just, I don't want to overanalyze whether it's books, in person, what they present like in person, we're not recommending overanalyzing that. It's simple. If we want to cut it down to 5 based on these proposals, great. If you want to just really see what everyone's pricing and things look like, we can't recommend because we're missing a piece of the puzzle, but either way is
Michael?
I recommend, at least initially, looking at the 10. I mean, we kind of see this as a 2-step process. And, yeah, I think, to Glenn's point, some have been in this process longer. I think we should look and see if someone else can knock our socks off. Maybe they can't, maybe they don't.
If we would say a 60-day time, just start try to move this along. If we would say a 60-day time frame, they must come back with a more robust proposal. You guys take a look at that. You may cut it down to 5.
I would, get more robust as defined already. Yeah, you're doing your due diligence, you're putting pricing in, you're giving us concept plans, you're giving us our vision, you're giving us, your partnership. We want to meet with you, prior, at any sort of, board meeting. We want to understand this and kind of take that, 60 days to really understand it. I think that's plenty of time.
Yeah,
I will say though, the RFP does say 90 for due diligence, just so that's what they're working off of currently, is it says they would have 90 days, and so not to say we can't amend it, but that is what was in the document.
You could ask them to do 60, that's a negotiation.
I look at it in a couple of stages they're not going to complete their due diligence in this upfront 60 or 90 days. They're going to take the time to get contracts, understand what their partnership agreement, their plan, really get you some sort of defined pricing to look at. When we narrow it down further, that's when they're really going to go start spending money, spending time to understand, doing environmental surveys, title work. They're not going to do any of that in the 60 or 90 days. All we're asking, or all we would be asking in this phase, is to get really a detailed, not qualifications, but a detailed plan of attack for this site.
That's what I'd like to see.
So is the big piece that's missing, I think I hear you say that the one thing that could really help us narrow it down is the pricing.
Yes,
And you think there's some maybe potentials in that bottom 5 that if we had that, maybe we could make a different decision?
Yes, it's pricing, and it's also a function of what can be done on the site. So we can't just look at it like this guy can fit this 1 million square footer and who's going to pay X, because it may not end up being a big box development. It may be a bunch of 20,000 square foot buildings that need to be developed. So it's a function of price, but also the price is more difficult to come by right now because we don't have a clear vision of what's going to get approved on that site. It's not as clear cut as it's an industrial zone. We know the coverage is X. We know we max out at roughly 2 million square feet. There's a whole lot of cloudiness over what is ultimately going to be built there. So some developers would be better at smaller box stuff, some would be better at big box stuff, and that all comes into their equation on what the pricing is. So the answer to your question, sorry, answer it the long way, but it's a function of price, but it's also what questions do the developers need answered to get to that pricing. And a main one is zoning.
So could we get those could we get the first question answered about zoning for them and then ask them for price and then narrow it down? Is that?
Well, I think it would be one and the same. They'll have a general comfort with it. At least they'll get pricing, assuming that they can do X and assuming they can do this plan. But so, General Pro was one that gave us pricing on multiple use layout, which was done well. They could give us a price based on that. Someone else might have a different approach and give us a price based on that, but it gives us something tangible to look at, was what their plan is and the price that they, at least at this stage, would be willing to pay for it, subject to further due diligence.
And that's a good point, is once we get the pricing, we want to understand how they price it, make sure it's in line, and it's pricing that they can buy is feasible. So
someone may have the highest price, but they're trying to build 4 million square foot building. It doesn't really do anything. It's not worth it.
Jeff, is it fair to say, though, that everyone in the room understands the e-commerce, big box, B2B, B2C dynamic is booming here, right? One of the best markets in the country.
Yes.
But it's also hot for smaller buildings, right? I mean, everything seems to be
there's
pointing.
a lack of available.
So the good news for us is, even if it's you have to live with pro forma zoning, the warehouse distribution restriction, the Hanover Township places, the road situation, still the demand is there, whether it's 40,000 foot or 350, right? I mean,
there's still
there's office demand, there's flex demand, there's lab demand, there's warehouse demand, there's retail demand.
So
pricing per square foot for industrial warehousing is the highest.
Right.
And the bigger the building, the less parking and inside the building, the more you're going to get there.
Less infrastructure to build.
Even as it's currently written, there are some restrictions on the percent of a flex buildings.
Right.
That if you've ever built them, you build them to be 100% office or 100% warehouse, so it's tough to define to someone that's building flex how much they can do without the tenant in place. But to your point, the demand is there for flex buildings, and the demand is there for.
Yeah. So the quote-unquote worst case to the best case is still a good case, and the demand is there even if you have to live within the
Within the footprint, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the good news for us, right? So when we go through this, you go through this process and call this down. The key questions in an interview are you the developer, willing to work A, B, C, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of.
Yeah, the two best responders in our mind would not be as good as 2 of the other 5 that have the experience in some of the smaller buildings.
Yeah.
So that's, again, back to the earlier point, we try to keep a good mix in the top 5.
John has a question.
Just want to circle back on the number of respondents that we want to include. I'm not at 10, but I could go to 7 if we ruled out the bottom 3 that did not respond completely to the RFQ. That to me is very telling. I've been through this in terms of architectural presentations, engineering presentations. If they didn't take the time now, I don't believe they'll take the time 2 months from now.
Fair enough. And
So to
again-
me, I throw out 7 as a compromise, that people that responded to the RFQ completely get that audience, get that next step, and we rule out the bottom 3.
We would agree with you, and the only reason 10 is out there, just to reiterate again, is that if pricing if you needed to see that pricing, you felt without seeing that and that absolute plan of attack, that it would be tough to subjectively remove someone. But if someone doesn't spend that time to get exactly the answers you're looking for,
I
that's
think 10's too many.
totally understandable.
Yeah, we're going to get into analysis paralysis with 10.
That's
I
my
think-
concern.
I think 5 to 7 seems to be reasonable.
One of the things I'm thinking about, we talk about 60 days, our RFPQ, that's for 90 days. My concern is if we try to monkey with that now, we're going to be, I think we conceivably open a can of worms that it's going to be difficult for us to ever close up again. I think you might be able to say to them, can you respond in 60 days, but realize they do have a 90-day window.
We're not saying 5's not possible, just wanted to hear us out on playing, play devil's advocate with ourselves a little bit here.
And the schedule with 90 days gets us done by the end of the year still, is
Okay.
where we would select somebody going into the beginning of next year. So that was
Darren, did the
careful.
first round have 120? I thought maybe we had already shortened it.
We did shorten it. The first time we put the RFP out, we had 120-day period. We shortened it to 90 when we republished this. So I think we'd be really cutting it back
So let's
again.
understand
You know.
the time frame is 90 days. And if everybody gets it before 90 days, so much the better, but the time frame is 90 days. To move things forward, does 7 seem like a more reasonable number for us?
I have a question regarding that, because I'm not too wet on a number particularly, but as an example, let's just say if we were just solely targeting, and I'm sorry if I don't know the real estate vernacular, but just a big box warehouse type project, then 10 would be overkill, right? Because there are probably certain developers that are qualified, and there's only so many variations, I guess, of a 4 million square foot box that you can come up with, right? So you quickly jump to who's qualified, who's got a good price, and who's whatever. But it seems like in this space, we have not yet clear, I guess, direction on what it is we can ultimately put there, or what's the best use. So that's why I'm kind of looking at 2 to 3.
The township has some pretty clear ideas of what.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, so the RFQ is written for industrial, but industrial is not permitted in the current zone. And flex, so a mix of office and industrial within the same building is permitted, but even that is limited in the percentage of warehouse within that flex building. So we're trying to maybe at least be optimistic in that we hope we can have some warehouses, some of the proposed offers show a park and some berms and some retail and maybe a little bit of warehousing. That's probably what we're hoping for in that ultimate scenario, but you're right, we don't have clear
That's why my logic is try to keep it as open-ended at this point as you can, because let's just go through this example and playing it out. If we have 2 to 3 that are kind of more qualified, have experience, et cetera, their plans center around big box, and it sounds like there's maybe 2 to 3 that are flex space, and there's 2 that are small box retail. You generally kind of want to look at 2 to 3 alternatives rather than just getting pinned down to 1, I would assume, right? Or maybe not.
Well, I think that's the mix that we got now. We're pretty comfortable with 5. We did throw 1 or 2.
Those 5 do all that.
Okay.
The difference between 1 and 10 is great. The difference between 4 and 6, not really a big difference.
You would have no qualm with going to 7, and you could identify who those next 2 are?
No, the board has heard out the 2 ends of the spectrum between 5 and 10, and maybe that's the best of both. You're eliminating those that really nailed it in, and you're not excluding those that maybe didn't have the 3 years that number 1 and 2.
A couple of those big ones are new people. Those first class ones are new people at the table. Certainly one is.
Yep.
But in the top 5, but 2 of them
Top
are,
5, that's one
actually.
of the new ones at the table.
There were 2 that hadn't submitted before that are in our top
To move
5.
things forward, Ann, would you modify to 7? Absolutely. Modify your motion to 7?
Yes.
Would you modify your second to 7? We have a motion on the floor to pursue the next 7 with the assistance of Cushman Wakefield and to have them respond in 90 days.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Aye.
So we have 2 opposed, everybody else in favor. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for the discussion. Guess I blew our 1 o'clock adjournment time, didn't I?
Yes.
And a couple items came up under finance and capital planning, and I suspect you'll defer to those just to.
Yes, I'm going to defer 100% to the staff.
All right.
Okay, good afternoon. One of the items that we're seeking approval today on is the approval to upgrade our common use equipment. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background on what that entails, our common use equipment is essentially all the technology that you see behind the counters, both at the ticketing counters as well as at the gate area in the departure building. So what you see the agents for all the airlines using, we are a common use facility, so what that means is we have the ability to move an airline from one gate to the other seamlessly and have them have the ability to access their applications. The last time we did any sort of upgrade on this type of infrastructure here in the airport was back in 2012. So the newest equipment is just over 5 years old now that we're using currently. Some of the equipment actually goes back all the way to 7 or 8 years. So we've been encouraged strongly by the airline partners here to start upgrading our infrastructure. We've been running into some issues as they upgrade their applications. So it's really timely and it's really something that's needed to be addressed. So as part of this process, we actually embarked on a research phase trying to involve all the airline partners, the 4 airlines here at ABE, to ask them what their preferences are as far as common use providers. And they all strongly encouraged us to take a look at Amadeus Airport Technology Solutions, which really is a unique provider in the way that they provide a virtualized environment that really gives the airlines kind of the same sort of native look and feel of their applications as if they were in their own hub airports and their own systems. So we did engage with Amadeus, and they came back with a quote in the amount of $223,400. There was a line item under the 2017 capital budget for $400,000 for the capital use or for the common use system. So we are well under budget. So that's very good news, obviously. The first year support costs actually will see a reduction over our current provider, which is Air Inc. Currently, we'll actually see a $7,500 reduction. As time goes by, years 2, 3, and 4, and 5, obviously the maintenance typically goes up, just industry standard type of things. Expected cost increases usually in the neighborhood of 10 to 12% of an increase. So nothing earth-shattering there. So that's really essentially the sum of what we're trying to do here, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
I move the approval of the recommendation.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I have a second.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, I actually have some experience in this, with regard to the common use. I don't know if everyone understands the common use or not, but simply stated, out the gate areas specifically, if you're working at KP1 and you're out there with American Airlines, and for some reason the next channel over they cancel, you still work the information because all the terminals in the entire airport have the same information. That becomes the common use. Talked about Amadeus. I've worked with the people at Amadeus, historically top-notch individuals that on tour with the organization. Can you first remember, it used to be the carriers owned all the reservation systems. Who owned Amadeus or Amadeus? Do you recall?
Amadeus is a company, I believe they're a European organization. It used to be known as Air IT. So they're relatively new in the industry. When I say new, within the last 10 years. But they've leveraged current technologies, virtualization, so forth, that some of the legacy providers such as CETA and Eric, which is known as Rockwell Collins, they haven't really gotten to that point yet. So they're a little bit behind. So hopefully with this, we're actually getting ahead of the curve.
And with technology, it changes so fast. You see us having to change it again in the next 5 years or maybe 2 years, but I'm not.
Yes.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. And the approval of BMO Harris reimbursement line of credit resolution. Todd's already up and ready to go.
Up and ready to go. As you remember from the cash flow, we had that $500,000 line item. This is something that we RFQ'd, I believe it was in April, went through a bunch of companies. We decided BMO had the best rate, and they're also our bondholder. So this is formalizing our lease line of credit. It's pretty standard. We already
What does it mean, formalizing?
Oh, is this a resolution?
Just a resolution. Didn't we approve it back in April or select that back?
We selected them, but this is the board has to approve the resolution that we I'm sorry. Any questions?
And you'll make the motion?
So I move the approval of Todd's recommendation.
Neil, would you second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Yes.
And last question, approval of the bid to Grace Industries for the air cargo apron expansion.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Just a couple of quick slides here.
You remember this discussion from a couple months ago?
So this is follow-up to some of that discussion, but what we're looking for is approval of the bid that we received for the air cargo apron expansion. As you know, we brought this to the board a few months ago with the design and working through. So we're actually on schedule, pushing forward. So just kind of a brief overview. This is obviously our existing cargo apron with 5 positions. Been putting in a new position here with required stormwater. This is just a view out heading this way, just for some context. So we actually received 5 bids for this project, which is actually very promising. It's good to see. I received them on July 20th. Grace Industries was the low bidder at roughly $2.8 million. Bids had a pretty good range, but in looking at it and getting the recommendation letter from the engineer, primary differences were, as you see here, mobilization, excavation, soil, some of the asphalt costs. Grace Industries is basically 2 miles up the road, so they were able to get a really good price on a lot of these items, which we're not going to complain about since they meet all of the other requirements. The big thing here to take away, engineer's estimate was approximately $3.2 million, which again, the low bid was about 13.4% below that. So again, everything else hit the boxes and check marks that we needed. So we're comfortable with that. So again, we're making the recommendation to award the bid to Grace Industries. And again, just as a background, and we've talked about it, but we identified this project on our 2017 strategic plan. It's something all the cargo carriers wanted in by around Thanksgiving of this year.
So our timeline is by November?
Yeah, so a timeline actually with the approval and moving forward, we're looking to get our permits around the end of August. We've had some preliminary back and forth with the Conservation District, but everything is going well currently. And again, we're still shooting for a 90-day construction schedule. They had mentioned after the engineer talked with them, they mentioned that shouldn't be an issue with the given projects we have, and that's part of them submitting the bid and the requirements. So
Funds come for this? Fund for this come from?
it's partially our funds, and some of this was from the FedEx sale, the AFP restricted account, which we reflected with Todd in the cash flow. So with that, just looking for recommendations. So any questions?
Recommend,
Yes, I move the approval of Grace Industries for the air cargo apron expansion.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any discussion?
I have a question. Is this expansion based on the cargo that we presently have, or is it, are we trying to project out beyond what we presently have? Because I know we have a lot of cargo flights presently. We hope that relationship will continue, but do we have any guarantees or have any time frame that these people are going to expand? Or?
It's somewhat both. I mean, basically the way that they operate today, they need that additional space in terms of bringing some folks in, but ideally it would allow us to improve operations for all the cargo carriers out there. So it includes FedEx as well as part of that. They're definitely excited to see that happen because of how their operation is today.
I know I know timing was very, very tight, but was there some kind of like ROI analysis done to quantify the investment? It's $2.8 million, I think, right? Was the incremental traffic, I guess, and how many projected
Yes,
cargo
there was
flights we're going to have on
analysis
that apron, et cetera?
Yes.
What's the break even then? How many years?
Just to take a look and see, I'm not sure of that.
You can get that information to you.
Okay.
And this was this included in our capital plan that we had already approved
No, this was not, but it is on the master plan.
on the master plan?
Yes, it is.
And that doesn't include the $400,000 or so that was the engineering cost, right?
No, it doesn't. This is just for the.
That's a separate
building.
cost, the
That's correct.
engineering design, et cetera,
Right.
and this is the construction work?
Correct. Yep.
Now, is this going to hit the targeted Christmas season that we were looking forward to getting in? Because it says end of November, and that's assuming everything goes on plan.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, that's the plan. Again, once we get all the permits in place and they can mobilize and begin, that's the date that we had in there. Didn't seem like an issue with them meeting it. So we're definitely going to push them for that date to at least get operational really around Thanksgiving was the big
Because
push.
we have projections of increasing flights.
Correct. Yeah, and just to keep in mind, we're talking about 13 inches of concrete, so you have to have a 30-day cure time, roughly 30 days. So that's built in there as well, so which the contractor is aware. So.
Any other questions? A motion and second. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Very good. And thank you very much. Staff, thank you very much. Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to remind everyone the movie at Braden Airport, Fly-In, Drive-In, is scheduled for the 26th of August. We are featuring Storks. Gate open at 6:30. As a follow-up, we did conclude our third pre-check enrollment center. Through the three that we've had, we've processed over 4,600 applicants. So we're very excited with our relationship and partnership with the Transportation Security Administration. And lastly, I would like to conclude my director's report by saying I want to thank the Board of Governors for the support and the privilege of leading a strong team of dedicated professionals through a challenging period. I have confidence that the staff will continue to perform exceptionally and seize every opportunity to move your airport system forward. Thank you very much.
Again, Charles, I want to thank you. Think of where we were 6 or 7 years ago, and that whole process of bringing in a firm and then electing to bring you on full-time as our executive. I think we couldn't have made a better decision. And the process of that, I think, has been remarkable for us. The image we have in the community, the sense of, I think, integrity when we stood before Northampton County Council, and Glenn was our advocate, and a couple of people said, if this man says it can be done, it will be done. And so I think that's a remarkable testimony to your leadership, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think we've always been proud when you represent our organization, so thank you very much. And thank you to the team that backs him up in every respect.
Absolutely.
Solicitor's report.
The Commonwealth Court has scheduled argument on the WBF case for September 11th in Harrisburg. I will be attending and present the argument on behalf of the Airport Authority. The decision from Commonwealth Court typically is handed down within 90 days after the argument. So I would think by the end of the year, we're going to know where we stand in terms of the appeal. The other matter is the Airport Ventures matter, which is this fee dispute that's arisen from the condemnation. The hearings have been completed. I today have completed our responsive brief, and findings of fact and conclusions, and submitted it to the court. So at this point, the matter is in the hands of Judge Verricchio for a decision. She may order that we appear for an oral argument before her, although it's entirely possible she'll say she's able to decide it based on the briefs that have been submitted.
Any questions? New business. I think the only item of the new business we discussed was the idea of that Bob Kutzler presented to us earlier, and I understand staff is working on that. And who's responsible?
Tom Stout.
Okay, so Tom, you'll work on that. We really appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely.
Any other new business? Then I would like to ask to go into an executive session. We have one particular thing we need to address, and that is discussing specific individuals with regard to position of interim executive director to think about where we go in short term as well as where we need to go long term. So I'd ask for a motion for executive session.
So moved.
Motion and second. All those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Right, then can I ask everyone other than the board members to please leave. We will come back in session and hopefully have a decision as we move forward. What you say, Bob? You'll stay. My only complaint is the coffee is cold.
Some areas.
Just a dollar rate with some neighbors. But if you can position the Lehigh Valley the same way that Charles used it, intentionally or unintentionally, as a springboard to the next. And we're seeing 10 years now, and that's what college presidents are doing here. Alice Gass moved on to London. And this is the new time frame for Texas, 5 to 7 years. 5 to 7 years here, and then you can go run 5 to 7 years here, and you can go run the next thing. That's a way to put it.
One of our members is coming back in, but thank you again, and thank you to the staff and to the media for hanging around. May I have a motion to call us back into general session?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Judge, you want to talk about the reason for our executive session before we take action?
The reason for the executive session was to discuss personnel matter, that is, selection or designation of who should be the interim executive director after Mr. Everett departs, and no vote was taken. There was an open discussion, a candid discussion about qualities and so forth, but we've come back now into public session for purposes of making that decision.
And again, thank you all for the I think, energetic discussion we had. Would someone care to make a motion with regard to appointing an executive director, interim executive director?
I would move the appointment of Tom Stout for that position.
All right. Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
Any further discussion? Then let's take a vote to the motion being to appoint Tom Stout as interim executive director of the Lehigh Northampton Airport Authority. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Was that an aye opposed or aye yes?
That was a yes.
I think it was an aye yes.
Mine was an aye, yes.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I'm getting used to the delay of telephone. So, Tom, congratulations. We're glad to have you as our you and I, and probably one or two of the members executive will sit down and discuss that and so on. But we will. We're happy to have you on board.
Thank you.
Appreciate
the opportunity.
Just to elaborate further on the discussion, knowing that we have now looked at a interim position, we know that we need to begin moving forward in a more extensive search for an executive director. And so I'll be talking to Charles about who might be search committees or search groups that we could utilize to move forward for a regional nationwide. I'm not sure what the right search would be, but certainly as extensive as need be to establish candidates. In the same time, I've asked members of the authority to send to me for distillation their thoughts and desires and comments with regard to what would be the qualities and so on of executive director, as well as future staffing issues. I'll try to distill that, and by the September meeting, I'm hoping to come back to you with some ideas, as well as, if not earlier, a recommendation to hire a search committee to move us forward. Any other questions or thoughts? A motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that's actually a neat one. That works on yours. So if you don't right now, if you have I'm not sure which one. I probably won't actually. Yeah. I'll tell you what, my development